former BBC News presenter Huw Edwards is in court for sentencing after pleading guilty to 3 counts of making indecent images of children. He could face a community order or prison sentence after police found 41 indecent images on his phone, which he accessed and opened after being sent them on WhatsApp. Well, criminal defence lawyer Liam Kotrie joins me now. Liam, very good to talk to you today. Tell us a little bit about these charges, just to explain what they mean in terms of the creation of these images.
Well, it's a good question because making is a very unhelpful term. It sounds like someone's actually been taking photographs of children or something along those lines, when in fact that's not the case. Making usually means the downloading or even receiving. It's the creation of an image usually on an internet-enabled device. In this case, via WhatsApp messages. They've been created on the phone when they've been received, hence making.
Yeah, so he opened something that was sent to him. So what are the sentencing parameters that the courts are going to be thinking about today?
We have categories A to C here, A being the most serious. The starting point for a category A images, possession, which is how it is sentenced, same as making, is a starting point of 1 year in custody. Now, it's unusual or highly unusual for someone who has pleaded guilty to these kinds of offences to remain in the Magistrates Court for sentencing. That would suggest that if he is to be sentenced today, that the sentence will be below the recommended guidelines. Now, we've heard that there will be psychiatric evidence put forward today, but that's often the case in these kinds of cases. So frankly, it's strange that this matter is remaining in the Magistrates Court, but the court does have the power to commit to the Crown Court if the judge feels that the matter is too serious for his sentencing powers.
Who decides where sentencing is held? Who made that call that it should be in the Magistrates Court and not referred up to the Crown Court?
The judge would make that decision. We're dealing with the chief magistrate here of the country who dealt with the hearing on the first occasion. And if reporting is to be believed, then he said at that hearing that Mr. Edwards will be sentenced today. The prosecution will have made representations, as will the defence at that first hearing, but it is the judge himself who made that decision.
So what's happening in court at the moment? The prosecution, Ian Hope of the prosecution, was going to outline the facts of the case in front of the Chief Magistrate, Paul Goldspring. But then in Huw Edwards' defence, Philip Evans KC, will be providing submissions on his behalf. What kind of submissions do you think it's likely that a defence barrister would be providing in this case?
Well, the big ones here are his credit for an early guilty plea. He pleaded guilty at the earliest opportunity. Then there is his lack of previous convictions. All of this goes a long way. Then the fact that he is the age that he is, having committed no previous offences during that time. Then there is his personal mitigation, how he ended up in this situation. The fact that these images were sent to him. The fact that he didn't send any, of course, but that would be a more serious offence, more likely to be a prison sentence. But as we've seen with the person who sent them, who did not receive a sentence, that is unlikely to happen here. They'd be talking about the psychiatric reports that have been prepared and how he has been affected by different things going on in his life, which all not cause this situation. These aren't excuses, but important contexts in these kinds of situations for someone to be sentenced according to their culpability for the actual offence.
And we also understand that Huw Edwards himself may get an opportunity to speak. Why? What would be the legal benefits of that? Why might his team suggest that he does that, or might that be something that comes from him?
Well, personally, it would never be the case that I would ask one of my clients to give evidence at a sentencing hearing. I'm there to represent them. I know how to mitigate on their behalf. And anything that they have to say should go through their counsel, through their representative. Yes, it is sometimes the case that a defendant is asked questions about the situation, how they feel about it, if they have anything to say. But the reality is that these rarely have an impact on sentencing, certainly not in a case like this.
Let's just have a reminder of how we got to this point. Last July, the Sun newspaper published allegations that an unnamed BBC presenter had paid a young person thousands of pounds for explicit photographs. 5 days later, Huw Edwards was named as the accused presenter, but police found no evidence of criminal offences. It was during a separate police investigation that Huw Edwards was arrested last November, although that was not made public at the time. He remained BBC staff until April, when he resigned on medical advice 9 months after last appearing on television. 2 months later, he was charged with 3 counts of making indecent images of children in relation to WhatsApp exchanges with the now convicted paedophile Alex Williams. He pleaded guilty to those charges in July. Police found 41 indecent images on his phone, including 7 of the most serious category of images and 2 involving a child as young as 7. He will be sentenced today for those crimes. Well, criminal defence lawyer Liam Kotrie joins me now. And Liam, we were just talking a little earlier, and you were talking about how unusual it is for this kind of sentencing to happen at a magistrates' court. What would have been the thinking behind that?
Well, I mean, I use the term unusual, but the reality is that I've represented maybe hundreds of people charged with these kinds of offences, and I don't think once has one been dealt with in the magistrates' court. All have been committed to the Crown Court. Now, the Crown Court doesn't have to necessarily give a prison sentence or even a more serious sentence. It can give a similar sentence to one that would be passed in the magistrates' court. But it shows the severity of the offence and shows the offender that these, and the wider public, that these kinds of offences should be heard in the Crown Court. Now, I wasn't at that first hearing. Some mitigation may well have been put forward at that stage, which made the judge feel that he could deal with it. Of course, in terms of prison sentence, the limit may be 6 months per offence, with a maximum of 12 months. But a community order can be much longer. And if he was told about psychiatric reports and mental health and physical health problems at that first hearing, then he may have felt that it may well be the case that he could deal with it there. But again, unusual is an understatement. It's unheard of in these kinds of situations.
What's happening at the moment? We've had a reminder from the prosecutor of the outline of the facts of the case, but also the prosecution, rather than the defence, has been outlining Huw Edwards' physical and mental health problems. Why would the prosecution do that?
I don't think it's much of a tactic in terms of achieving a larger sentence or anything like that. I think it's more just a good procedure, good professional courtesy to say that they accept the fact that there were mental health issues involved. It's not something that needs to be debated today, and he can be sentenced on those facts. They are effectively agreed facts in the sentence hearing.
And how significant will those facts be when the judge decides about sentencing?
When it comes to these kinds of offences where someone can effectively receive a prison sentence, but one that can be suspended, it seems that may not be the case today. It may be a community order, as Martin Brunt suggested earlier. But it can be the difference between prison and not prison in a lot of different situations. But here, really, we're looking at full mitigation, so the judge is sentencing the offender and not the offence. Both of these things need to be taken into account. The harm that it causes, but also the culpability, and that is as per the sentencing guidelines. So it is very important background information. Again, not excuses, but important context through which a judge will pass a sentence.
As we're talking to you, Liam, there's more information coming out of court. Huw Edwards was apparently assessed as medium risk of causing harm to children. This is a pre-sentencing report which has been given to the court, which says mere viewing of indecent images of children perpetuates sexual and psychological harm through exploitation of victims, even though it's indirect. He's been assessed as posing a medium risk of causing serious harm. He apparently told his probation officer that his offending arose out of his fixation on online communications of a sexual nature, his poor mental health, using alcohol, and the deterioration of his personal relationship. And the pre-sentence report outlines the adverse media attention, which has increased levels of stress and anxiety. Also, the court has heard that he's currently doing well therapeutically in the psychiatric unit of a hospital environment where he's being treated, but that he has a history of impulsivity and a lifetime risk of relapse. It says there is a risk of him viewing indecent images and engaging with sexual communications with others. So that will be something that the judge will seriously look at, and how will that affect what other restrictions there may be on his freedom after the sentencing?
Well, the pre-sentence report is a very important document in these kinds of hearings. It's as a result of a one-to-one conversation with the probation officer and the offender. So it means it's also an independent view. So it's not from a prosecutor, it's not from a defence lawyer. It's an independent view that assists a judge in sentencing. It may affect restrictions later on. Chances are that Edwards will be subject to a sexual harm prevention order at the end of this hearing. That's an order which restricts or prohibits the way in which someone can use an internet-enabled device, for example. So the police would have to be able to view any device that he has at any time. If he purchases a new one, then he has to notify them of that. Monitoring software may have to be installed on those devices. Those devices can be looked at all the time. He will not be able to delete any history from those devices, things of that nature. He will be well monitored. These orders are put in place to ensure that people have the freedom to access the internet and communication apps, including WhatsApp, but ensuring that they are properly monitored so that the public is kept safe and secure.
OK, Liam Kotrie, criminal defence lawyer. Very good to talk to you. Thanks very much for giving us your expertise on this.
Thank you.
As we await Huw Edwards coming out of the Magistrates Court there, let's return to Liam Kotrie, a criminal defence lawyer. And Liam, what do you make of this sentence, 6 months suspended sentence? What do you make of it?
Well, we heard about the mitigation, we heard about the psychiatric report, the pre-sentence report, the allegation itself, and all of these were quite common scenarios that I've heard time and time again. What was unique in this case was the offender and the sentence passed. Again, almost always, if not always, these cases are committed to the Crown Court for sentence, and a sexual harm prevention order is imposed to restrict the way people use internet-enabled devices. This hasn't happened in this case. It must be different for some other reason, hopefully other than the fact that he is the celebrity that he is. Of course, he has a huge fall from grace, 63 years old, an incredible career before his conviction. And now he is having to deal with the shame of this, which is mitigation in itself. But a 6 month suspended sentence, the maximum sentence, prison sentence that the judge could pass in the Magistrates Court has been passed today. But no sexual harm prevention order, quite surprising.
He does, though, have to sign the sex offenders register for 7 years, paying over £3,000 in costs and a victim surcharge, and also 25 rehabilitation sessions. Is that unusual?
The sex offenders register is mandated by law. That's not at the discretion of the judge. That applies when someone is convicted of these offences, and then the length, the duration of the order, or the notification requirements, or placement on the sex offenders register is dictated by the length of sentence that they receive. So this isn't something that's been passed by the judge. In terms of the rehabilitation requirements as part of the suspended sentence, very common and very important. He needs rehabilitation. It's of course good to hear that he's taken these steps previously. We've heard a lot about the indirect effect on the abuse of children as a result of this kind of offending. It's so often the case that defendants in these situations don't think about those effects because it's indirect. It's not an excuse. They should think about it, and it's only when they are caught that they show that insight. It's very sad, and hopefully the work by Bernardo's and others will show that show the real causes or the real impact by this kind of offending.
And also, we heard today that he is now living in a mental health facility. That he is also considered potentially a suicide risk. Will that have affected the judge's decision about sentencing at all, or is that something that they don't take into consideration?
They certainly do. Personal mitigation is very significant, especially when someone pleads guilty. It gives the judge a much wider range of mitigation to be able to listen to. In these circumstances, the fact that he was suicidal, the fact that he not only needs the treatment, but he is seeking out the treatment required, because there are so many who require treatment who don't accept it. The fact that he's actually accepting treatment and doing all he can to rehabilitate himself will have gone a long way with the judge. But again, not uncommon. These cases are often investigated for years before charge. And once someone is first arrested and interviewed by the police, then it gives them an opportunity to reflect, to see what rehabilitation that they can seek themselves before they are sentenced. So again, not unusual. This, in terms of the offending, in terms of the offences, the allegation, this is not a unique case.
It's appalling, isn't it, when you say it's not a unique case, and that you've actually represented hundreds of people charged with this offence. Just how prevalent is it now?
Well, it seems in my office it's very prevalent because we deal with so many, but of course we're talking about a big population. These are almost always middle-aged plus men who are going through some kind of depression, some kind of void in their life, where they seek escapism. Some people turn to video games or building model planes. Some go to the internet, to pornography, to chat rooms, to meeting people like the co-defendant in Mr. Edwards's case, and eventually find themselves doing something that sometimes they never thought they would. They don't often they don't actively seek out these people, and these people aren't necessarily paedophiles. But of course, the definition is open to interpretation. They're people who have found themselves in these situations who need some kind of rehabilitation, ideally before these things happen. And interestingly, it's always men who don't talk about their feelings, talk about problems that they're going through in their lives, not dealing properly with their depression, and find themselves in these situations. Not excuses. He's made a choice. He made a choice, and all these offenders have made that choice to receive these images, to view these images. But the context of the offending is always important.
And also, not an excuse, but what was clear from the court and through his lawyers was a really heartfelt apology, an understanding of what he had actually done, and an apology to those around him that it had affected, including his family and his children.
Yes, well, interestingly, we talked earlier about whether or not he would speak on his own behalf and whether or not that would be encouraged. Well, it seems he did, but through a letter. And not only are the abused children, of course, the primary victims in these kinds of situations. They're not the only victims, of course. There are, for a better word, lesser victims. His family, those close to him, the public, who've trusted him for decades to deliver the news to them on the BBC of all places. And all of those people have been severely let down. His wife, of course, has no doubt been through hell in these circumstances. Another innocent victim as a result of his offending.
The court also heard of his mental health struggles, but also his physical health struggles, that he suffers with arteriosclerosis, which causes the gradual hardening of the arteries. And the court was told that the effect of these conditions includes an impact on and an impairment of mood, behaviour and judgment. I mean, do you think that this is a fair enough thing to raise in the court? I mean, you know, we all know that physical ailments can have all sorts of impacts, but suggesting that sort of hardening of the arteries can affect your judgment, is this something that you as a defence lawyer would have suggested?
With evidence from an expert, perhaps. If an expert told me that that was the case, I'm no doctor. I couldn't say whether or not this is the case in this particular situation or any other. But it was fully accepted by all parties that Mr. Edwards suffered from mental health conditions, depression, and so on. Whether or not that was due to physical ailments, I'm unaware. Whether or not it was accepted in court that it was due to physical ailments, I do not know. But it's not uncommon to talk about physical illnesses in these situations. It doesn't take a doctor or an expert to realise that a serious physical condition can affect someone's mental health. And if someone is proven to have mental health issues plus physical issues on top, it's not a jump or a leap to suggest that the physical condition exacerbates the mental.
And in terms of the punishment that he's received, I mean, surely the point of all punishments for crime is to prevent a reoccurrence of that crime and to lead to some kind of rehabilitation. We've been talking a lot about, you know, the fact that he is not going to prison, that it's a suspended prison sentence. But in terms of the kind of rehabilitation sessions that he has been told he must go on, what is the success rate? Do these particular courses actually bear fruit?
Well, I find that the arrest itself, and again, I was talking about these investigations sometimes going on for years. It's not unusual for someone to be arrested and then not charged until 2 years later. Then we're talking about sentencing in the following month. So well over 2 years for someone to be sentenced for a crime they committed a long time before. It's often the case for me, I find, and this is probably anecdotal, but dealing with many of these cases, that the horse has already bolted. They don't tend to re-offend in that 2 year period, if it is a 2 year period, and mainly due to the shock of what's happened. It's often a relief when people are arrested. They find themselves in this web of lies between themselves and their family and their computer, where they are hiding such a terrible secret. It's often a relief when people are finally arrested. That sometimes they know that it's coming in the back of their mind. When it finally does, it's a relief, and then they don't offend again. It's in fact unusual for people to reoffend. I think it's a great idea that people are given rehabilitation requirements as part of any kind of suspended sentence order or community order. But again, it sometimes feels like it's well after the horse has bolted.
And in terms of this case itself, I mean, obviously it's received such a huge amount of publicity from the outset of the allegations first being made. Do you think, I mean, I don't know if you have a view on this, will this lead to perhaps people pausing before they perhaps click on images in the future, knowing that actually now it's been made very clear that just by actually looking at an image, it is classed as creating it and you are committing an offence?
Well, one would hope people would already know that's an offence, but perhaps a high-profile person such as Mr. Edwards being convicted of this crime and sentenced and in the full public eye will hopefully deter others. I think that's much more likely to deter others than any sentence itself. It's often the case that just someone's name appearing in the paper, so their family, friends, neighbours, the rest of their acquaintances know about the situation they've been in, the shame that it puts on them. The fact that they can lose their job, it changes their lives entirely, can be worse than any sentence that a court may pass. So hopefully, and let's face it, it is real shame that Mr. Edwards faces today will deter further potential offenders.
We're getting a statement, just as we talk to you, Liam, from the BBC. A spokesperson says he has betrayed not just the BBC, but audiences who put their trust in him. We are appalled by his crimes. I think that this is just a small snapshot of perhaps possibly a larger statement that we may well be getting from the BBC very, very soon. Yeah, the BBC saying that we are appalled by his crimes, that Huw Edwards has betrayed not just the BBC, but the audiences who put their trust in him. Liam, what are your final reflections on this sentencing today?
Well, it's been an unusual situation in terms of the sentence, the fact that things have stayed in the Magistrates Court, no sexual harm prevention order. But I don't think the public need to be worried about Huw Edwards in the future. I can't see him reoffending. I think today has shown that what someone would go through, the shame, the scrutiny when someone's convicted of such an offence, and hopefully that would be a deterrent for the future. Again, I've dealt with hundreds of these cases, and it's an unusual sentence, but the allegation, the circumstances, the offences, the pre-sentence report and mitigation are all very common. The scenario of this man who has found himself in this situation at this time of his life is quite a common situation, but the sentence and the sexual harm prevention order and lack of Crown Court sentencing is unusual for this celebrity.
Indeed, and I suppose it's most important that perhaps we should always reflect in these situations, as Bernardo's has said, on the children who were the subject of these images that will have had long-lasting effects as a result of them. So just to reprise the breaking news that's happened in the last half hour, Huw Edwards, the former BBC news presenter, has been sentenced to 6 months imprisonment, suspended for 2 years. It does include a sex offender treatment programme and 25 rehabilitation sessions. He has been told he must sign the sex offenders register for 7 years.